everyone and welcome. If you don't know us yet, that's perfectly normal. We are a French podcast specializing in the world of theme parks and leisure in general. Our team around the table has a special fondness for Disneyland Paris, and more particularly for Discoveryland, which is the equivalent of Tomorrowland elsewhere in the world. It is with great emotion and pride that we present to you this exceptional 5-episode series featuring the artistic director of Discoveryland, Tim Delaney. With him, we will look back at his career, the project that he has led, and we will focus in particular on Discoveryland and, above all, on a small attraction that literally saved Disneyland Paris in 1995, Space Mountain, from the Earth to the Moon. Join us on the table is our friend Greg, who made this encounter possible thanks to a project that he recreated Space Mountain in 3D back in the day.
So first of all, hi team, and thanks in the names of all the people in the team here. Thanks a lot, an awful lot, to be here with us to answer our questions for the interview.
Yeah, it's an honor, Tim.
It's a pleasure to talk to all the fans of Disneyland Paris and actually all Disney fans. It's always great. It's always wonderful.
Perfect. So here you are going to talk about with the French fans. So just before we begin, we have tradition here on Puissance Park. We ask a few questions about your feelings with certain rides, etc. So that's what we call the pre-show here. Oh. So Tim, first question, do you have a favorite ride in any park over the world? So not only Disney.
My favorite ride, I'm highly prejudiced. First of all, I will say that Space Mountain in Paris is my favorite attraction.
Yep.
And not only because I was like heading it up and doing the design, but it was a great time to work, in that park over there because, there were some challenges with the park. And so when we opened Space Mountain, it made a huge difference. It was a very positive impact on the Disneyland Paris project. And the reason for that is we had the right attraction with the right new technology, with the right storyline, with the right team working on it. It was an attraction that had the first of many things. We had the first onboard audio system. We had the first catapult launch roller coaster system. The ride was, having a Jules Verne kind of overview to it was perfect for the location.
It's a perfect place to do that and to pay a tribute to one of our most famous writer. Yeah.
Yes, and it was really to love the Veneers. Because the theme of Discoveryland was really to focus on the great European visionaries, and this attraction embodied that. So from a story point of view and a technology point of view, it was great. Now, from behind the scenes, I will tell you the ride and the attraction. There are many stories behind it, but the short version is, we adhered to the capacity demands for the park. They needed at least 2,200 an hour. By management of the Walt Disney Company, it came in under budget. And the end of all of that, the cherry on top of the sundae, was that for the TEA, it won the Attraction of the Year award for 1995. So when you have something you have a great team, you create something unique. The storyline was correct. The attraction, when I tell people that Space Mountain goes twice as fast as any of the other Space Mountains, and the fact that it really became a symbol for the park, created the park, and it brought, they kicked off the advertising, which really helped the park come back in terms of that. Yeah. It was great. I guess if there's only one, I'll just say one thing about it, which surprised me a little bit. It was the last major attraction added to that Disneyland Paris project.
Yes, last major, right? Yeah, the rest was just upgrades and things like that. So yes. Yeah. So your favorite ride is Space Mountain. We've understood that. Perfect. So now next question with Benjamin, another member of our team.
So hi, Tim.
Yes. Hi.
My next question is in some way from your favorite ride. So I would like to ask you simply, what is your favorite park of all, Disney or not Disney, whatever?
I'm going to have to say that, this is kind of, for people who work in Imagineering, I will tell you, the favorite park is always Disneyland. And it's because it's the one I grew up with. And it's really has much more of a kind of like I guess my generation of Imagineers really have that kind of to Disneyland. And incidentally, the overall kind of feeling about all the Disney parks is really not only do you love the attractions, but you create the memories and that go with those. I have to say, for multiple reasons, it's that one. In terms of building a new park, and all the team of the producers who led the design for Disneyland Paris, I think we built the best park there. In terms of when the park was open, it probably had at opening day the most E-type attractions, and it was the most complete. I mean, Tony Baxter was the head of overall executive in charge, and then you had 5 producers: Eddie Sato, me, Tom Morris, Jeff Burke, and Teets, working on the parks, and all of us were kind of real long-term Disney fans. So we actually wanted to create what we felt was the best opening day park, and I think it is. I mean, I really do.
I totally agree with you, because for many fans around the world, Disneyland Park in Paris is considered by an achievement from Walt Disney Imagineering and the glorious period of the theme parks in the world. But now, we will see later when we ask you the questions, most of people consider today it is Tokyo Disney Sea that is the crown jewel of theme parks, just before Disneyland Park in Paris. But maybe because we have some same influence from the land, from the directions, creative direction. So it's very, very nice. And I totally agree with you. When Space Mountain opened in 1995, it was the completion of the first vision for the Disneyland Paris park, and it's completed. Absolutely.
I mean, I will tell you right now that in my 34 years at Imagineering, I worked on all the Disney parks with the exception of the Japan portfolio. I did not work on Tokyo Disneyland, nor did I work on Tokyo Disney Seas. Familiar? I'm a big fan of the parks in Japan, what they do, and I think that the Tokyo Disney Seas, there's no, the quality and all that, but it is a different park. It's the castle parks to me are the ones that actually kind of relate to it. So whether you say Disneyland Paris is the second or Tokyo Disney Seas, that's kind of it's like either or. It has to do with your personal commitment rather than the actual design.
Yes, okay. So thank you for answering this question. And now I will let speak Valentin, another member of the Puissance Park, for the next question for the pre-show.
All right, team. So that's my favorite question of the pre-show we have. It's called, what is your guilty pleasure ride? So, we all have some a ride somewhere which is, it can be lame or people think it's the worst ride ever, but you can't be unbiased about it. So even if it's lame, you like it. So which ride is in that case for you?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough question.
Yeah, it is, but we all have one for sure.
Really good question. It's funny because the rides have a tendency to change over time, and I have to say that I just recently went back on the Alice ride at Disneyland. And it's a very, very, very simple ride. And they've updated a few things with projections, right? But it kind of takes you back to an era where you can tell a compelling story. And if you're familiar with the background of those stories, like the earls, then you really can see like how things got started. And that kind of is like it's kind of a foot back in the past, and you can see how things got going. Now, I mean, you can always compare new attractions with multi-billion, $million, things. And I just think whatever attraction you can take, and like that's one of the reasons why I liked Alice is at Disneyland specifically was, you really want to get to the basics of what is the story and what all that, and high technology makes it like like super high tech movies. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, if you don't have strong characters and a good story, it doesn't matter how much you put into special effects. And I kind of like the basic kinds of things. And again, today's rides are getting more and more sophisticated. And I've not seen the new Star Wars ride, the Resistance ride. I've not been able to get down there, and obviously with the park being closed. But I have to say, a simple ride like that, and I just kind of like it. It kind of represents the best of what I think Disney can do.
Do you have a park that you don't like? Actually, do you have from a young age that you wanted to do this job?
You don't have enough time on this podcast. I've been away from Disney for 10 years, and as soon as I walked out the door, I was inundated with people asking me to do work for them, and I worked on several parks, or I was asked to look at several parks, and there's no reason about what makes parks great. First of all, you really, have my own business. I have not worked on theme parks. I've worked on other things. Everybody in the world wants. I've worked on major sports arenas and for major sports teams. I worked in hospitals, libraries. Everybody wants experiences, shopping experiences. That's where I get calls now. People are not doing theme parks as much anymore. But so let's go back to the original question. The original question is like there are parks that are good, and there are parks that are great, and there are parks that are bad. And most of the ones that are bad don't adhere to any strong story development or character development. They just kind of put iron rides in, and they kind of dress them up, and they kind of lose the real strength of what Disney's all about.
Agreed.
Disney's about storytelling. Disney's about placemaking. The interesting thing that people don't actually, they may realize it unconsciously, but realistically, Disney's very famous for telling stories. But think about this for a moment. When you go to a Disney theme park, you're telling stories without words. The visuals have to tell everything. You just have to walk into a space and you either get it or you don't get it. And it's not about the architecture only. It's not about the detailing only. It's about how places are made. And this is a real science that people just don't understand. They don't understand it at all. But all of us have gone into places where you go, gee, I just like being here, or other places you're like, this makes me feel, I don't understand this. And we are all mentally and emotionally affected by spaces, whether it's too big or too small or it's not doing what it's supposed to do. A dark science that it's not that you consciously know, but you emotionally know. You feel like, well, I feel really good about here. And suddenly it makes me, whether it's the lighting and the color and all that. And when you find these places, it's great. When you have to create them, it's even more challenging. And that's why there's so much development that goes on in Imagineering on how to create places, themes and stories, and why we do so many drawings, or why we do so many models, and why we do all of these things, so that you have the experience of walking into something and it has a right Disney feel to it. And a lot of places just don't understand that science. They just don't get it.
Now, we would like to talk about your career. Can you tell us what led you to design? Did you go to the school for that? And most importantly, how did you end up at Walt Disney Imagineering?
Well, let me just tell you that I after looking back on my life, I realized that I started my career, if you will, when I was about 6 years old. And believe it or not, it was really the old, and I've talked about this in the past, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but it's really important to understand, what are the things that interest you when you're very young. And when I used to watch the Disneyland television show, and Walt Disney would come out and introduce the shows, and I was one, for some inexplicable reason, I was just completely focused on, said, would always say like, well, we have adventures, from Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland. Well, whenever the Tomorrowland stuff came up, I was like right at the edge of my seat.
It's crazy. Wow.
And it was like, and so Walt had produced, along with Ward Kimball, this Man in Space program. There's 3 shows: Man in Space, Man in the Moon, and Mars and Beyond. And the first Man in Space show, the Ward Kimball, who was the producer, and I worked with Ward years later, introduced the show, and he just said, in the way the show was structured, Under had brought in great scientists like Wernher von Braun and Willy Ley and all these other scientists, and they talked about the real aspects of traveling in outer space. And then Ward, who was always a funny animator, he did his own little kind of animated sections of aliens in outer space. And then they showed this final 15 minutes, this whole animated sequence of rockets, a launch into outer space, and it's all animated, beautifully animated. It was kind of the same style of the 1940s Max Fleischer Superman series. Okay, really kind of deco style, beautifully done, really beautifully done. And I was 6 years old. I was hooked on this. I was like, this is great. And what really captured me was just the concept of someone showing you a visual of something that's never been done before. Someone creates a vision, and suddenly you're like, wow, this must be real. History about this whole thing. And Walt had done these 3 shows, as I said, Man in Space, Man in the Moon, and Mars and Beyond. And they were quite popular, but the most is that President Eisenhower at the time called Walt and said, I got a bunch of scientists. They're trying to get us to get into outer space, but I saw your TV show. Would you send those shows to me? Because I want to show them, here's a roadmap. Now think about the power of this. Somebody creates a vision. From that vision, people look at it. Once people see things, then they end up believing that you could really do it. So imagine the President of the United States calls Walt Disney and says, can I send my son, will you send that show to me? I want my scientists to look at it. And years later I'd found out about this, but I was so struck even at the time of somebody creating a vision, said this is what we could do. And I have dedicated my life to that.
Just a quick question, Tim. When were you born? Because you were 6 during the Disneyland show on TV, so I guess it was in 54, something like that. So
I was born in 1948. That makes me 71 years old right now.
Okay. Yeah. So you saw it all the theme parks industry and all, starting from Disneyland.
You didn't go to school for this job because you knew since you were a child that you wanted to be part of it.
It was. What happened is that when I went to so for some, and also another reason, I used to just draw all the time on my own, but I didn't really go to school for that until I went to college. And then I got, I was like, I really want to try this art thing out. So I ended up going to a school up in San Francisco, and then was there for a couple of years. And one of my instructors said, you should go to Art Center College of Design. And so Art Center College of Design is in Los Angeles, and it's a really dedicated. You got to kill yourself. You work all the time. And I was in the industrial design program. And so I used to do a lot of renderings and drawings and paintings and all that stuff. And, I loved every second of it. I draw and create stuff every day, my life. And so what happened is I got out of school. I went to work for a few design companies. And about 3 years, and this is still kind of a mystery to me, but I will tell you that about 3 years after I got out of school, one of my instructors contacted me. And I'm still it's kind of a mystery to me because I hadn't spoken to him and I wasn't particularly close to him, but he was one of the illustration rendering classes I had. And he called me and he wanted to know if I wanted a job working at WED Enterprises.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even know what WED Enterprises was.
That's a good tip in the end.
So I was involved in another business, and I kind of turned them down because I didn't know, and I was a dumb kid, you know. And then about 6 months later, I was interested and they weren't. And then about 6 months after that, we mutually got together. And this particular gentleman was an instructor of mine, and he headed up the graphics department at WED, WED Enterprises, really. And so I learned very quickly that this was Walt Disney's personal design company that worked specifically for the theme parks. Worked on the theme parks, I should say. And Walt had created WED Enterprises primarily because he had been having troubles with there was always complications at the movie studios because of the unions. And he wanted to create his own design company where he was completely immune from unions and things like that. Yeah. And the benefit happened to be you could do anything in Imagineering, meaning if you're at the studio system, if you are a lighting person, you only do lighting. And if you're an artist or if you build scenery, that's all you do. Well, Imagineering, you can do anything you want. Okay, and it was completely up to you. So I went to work in the graphics department. I did all their illustrations. During and what that means is, I did a lot of posters for Disney. I did a lot of posters for Disney. And then I also did most of the illustrations when they would have a corporate sponsor come in and they wanted to put up, like Sunkist was going to sponsor a shop on Main Street, or if Space Mountain corporate identification stuff and do illustrations showing Space Mountain presented by, whoever would be RCA or whoever the company would be. So that's the kind of work I would do. So key was that once I got into WED Enterprises, I was there at the right time. I started in 1976, and I was there, and a lot of the old guard was still there. Herbie Ryman, Mark Davis,
John Hench?
Oh my God. All the old illustrators and all the old designers. John Hench was there, Marty was there, all these guys. Mark Davis, as I mentioned, Tony Baxter was there at that time, but I was one of the group of new people coming in, and I spent every available minute that I wasn't working, whether it's break time or lunchtime. I spent all my time going from office to office and introduced myself and seeing some of the older artists, and became very close with Herbie Ryman. And Herbie did the original drawing for Disneyland. And I just got to know these guys. Sam McKim, Ex Atencio, Walt Paraguay, all these guys who had been around, been with Walt for forever, and so I really learned from these guys. So the other thing I did is I realized that although I was in the graphics department doing illustrations for them, they were just beginning to work on this new project called Epcot. But it was all just coming out of the ground. And I will say that what I did is that I really, really wanted to work on that. I was a future guy all the time. I did all the contemporary stuff. I did all the space stuff. I did all that stuff. And I just loved it. And so what I did is that for the first year that I was at Imagineering, or WED, it was Imagineering came later on. The name came later on. But what I did is that every night I would go home and I started working on a new portfolio. And I spent a year working on this portfolio of doing architecture, futuristic stuff, and all that. So after a year, I went to my boss and to the management, which was basically John Hench and Marty Sklar.
And that's when you organized the meeting with Marty, etc., to show them what you can do and try to convince them that you were the man of the situation for bigger projects. Am I right?
And that's what I want to do. Exactly. And that's what I wanted to do. And like I said, I was showing them, I go into the big conference room there, and I'm showing John and Marty, and they go, "Don't you already work here?" And I went, "Yeah, but I think I can do more." Well, anyway, so there were a couple of steps I will leave out, but I'll just tell you that eventually I got moved upstairs, and my office was right next to Herb Ryman's. And years I just started doing, well, actually for most immediately, I just started working on concepts for Epcot, and I drew 10 hours a day. And I did somebody, they needed something, what about this point of view? And I have and I don't know how. I can't even explain it myself, but I've always had a particular skill at being able to look at drawings. If you look at my first website, you'll see it's mostly all the Disney work. If you show that, and what I did is I put together here's the designs that I was leading. I was creating. I eventually started designing and producing all the attractions that I worked on, where I would have teams working with me, but I would do the design. And then work with a team. You're always working with a team, great teams. I mean, you can't do anything without these teams. But I kind of would lead the way, and I would just like it could look like this, and I would draw it, and then I would go through these very lengthy rendering processes, which I mostly during my work I would actually have doing my job of managing all these people and going to meetings, and I would do all the renderings late at night. So if you look at my stuff, I organized my first website thing saying, here's the concept rendering, this is what we built. So I was always good at that. So I started doing that, just like drawing thousands of drawings for Epcot, and I just gave points of view, and that's how I got started doing that. And then I just keeps growing and growing and get more responsibility, and I knew how to build things. So, I was lucky, and it was lucky being in the right place with the right teams around me, with the right management. And,
for sure. So what was your first project for Epcot? Was it the Living Seas?
No, the Living Seas didn't open until 3 years after the park opened. So I was doing overall concepts for like Communicore and Spaceship Earth. And I always thought you should walk under Spaceship Earth. And there were people like, no, we have to go around it. So I did these drawings, and eventually we walked underneath it.
Yeah, so you really used your capacity with drawing as a prototyping tool, or as we call it today, a prototyping tool, which means that you were using this as another way to convince people and to show them an alternative way. And as the drawing was most versatile, it's, as you told in another interview already, many people talk different languages, but everybody gets the idea behind an image.
Or it gives inspiration for another thing, a little bit different, but from the idea you draw from the start on your first drawing.
Yeah, and so you were using this every time, basically, to have a point and to show your point of view. So I believe you're not the kind of guy that liked PowerPoints with bullet points, etc., etc. I think.
Well, actually, I do like them. Okay? I do like them because I can always defeat them. All right. So if we can step back a little bit of what I was saying before. Again, I go back to this whole thing when Walt Disney did that Man in Space program. And once you show somebody something, then for some reason, we are visual animals. This is basically how our background. We were, going back to caveman days. You're always in visually. You want to make sure you're safe. You're either you're trying to find something to eat, or somebody's trying to eat you. So you're very keen as to very visual perceptions of how things work and how they don't work, and they work on a subliminal basis. So once you draw something, I will officially tell you that I was always successful. Now let me define that. What you really want to do is you're always creating things. The creative business is all about creating ideas and selling them to people, okay? Whether it's upper management or whatever. Successful, what I did is I put myself in a position where I want to get a decision from people. So you can do this beautiful rendering, and you can, you want to pitch it to the upper management of the Walt Disney Company, and you tell the story, and tell why it's going to be what it is, and what the theme is going to be for Paris. Why we want to create something that's dedicated to these great European visionaries, and you tell the story and all that. And then you go, and it can look just like this. Sometimes they go, that's great, let's build it. Or they go, no, that's not what we want to do. And it happens sometimes. But the fact is, what you've done is you put yourself in a position that you've allowed people to make decisions so you can move projects forward. All right? And it's a real talent. And believe me, there's more ways today to visually put things together. I mean, again, it isn't just visual, but the visual part of it is really kind of like, it's the culminate. It's that thing, and it has to be embodied because, as I said earlier, remember, the most important thing is we are storytellers, but we're storytellers without words. Okay. And that's when you go, this is what it looks like. And if they look at it, and believe me, for every person on my team, me or my team, that does something, there's about 400 people who can sit there and criticize it. Okay. So you have to get past all that. And so you have to put it, and we have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to create things that are right and to make them make sense, and people have to get it. So the best thing you can do is you get everybody in the room where their heads nodding up and down going, yeah, okay. Believe me, when I've had to create things like, we're going to create a Discovery Land, I'm like, well, what is that? What's that look like? And there's actually, I had a real major breakthrough on that in my own head about how to do that. But essentially, well, okay, so what is that? What does that look like? How do you put it together? And so, we got lucky.
So yes, it's very important what you said, because you entered when it was called WED and later WDI. But there was a major changement in the 1984 when Michael Eisner and Frank Wells take the head of the Walt Disney Company. So they started to create new projects, new theme parks, new investments. So how did you feel when everything started to change in this period? It was for you a good period or a dangerous period, because you didn't know how was to be the next time in the next future?
It was the greatest day of my life.
Oh really?
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Cool to know.
So let's go just a couple of years prior to that. So Epcot Center opened in October of 1982. Mm-hmm. And it was a big project. It was a massive, the risks that were taken in inventing new ride systems. And with the team that we had, the company was relatively small at that time. And I think it was one of those situations where Epcot, we took on things, we had no idea what we were doing, so we just went ahead and did it. Mm-hmm. And so there were aspects of it, and when you do that, essentially all work in Imagineering ride systems. You're building one, okay, so you have to prototype it. So as a result, creating something new is expensive. So Epcot Center ended up going over budget 50%. Okay, the budget was like $800 million, and it came in at $1.2 billion. Now, in 1982, that was a lot of money.
It's a big dent in the bank account.
And it was, today today they put that in one being. There were threats that the company would actually be taken over and cut apart, and somebody was going to sell. Came in where basically it was Roy Disney Jr. and Stanley Gold from Shamrock, and they were obviously had a vested interest in the company. So they brought in Michael and Frank and Jeffrey Katzenberg and the whole team. They brought in an all-star team, and so where I was at that time. And when they came in summer of 1984, I was just in the last 6 months of finishing the Living Seas Pavilion. Oh. Living Seas Pavilion was going to be opened in January of 1985. What happened is that when these guys came in, I was, I had the major attraction. I was always meeting with those guys, Michael and Frank. And Frank Wells was an adventurer. Frank Wells was a scuba diver. Frank Wells was just a genius. And so what happened is that for those first 6 months in the summer of 1984, those 6 months, those guys were actually coming in and trying to establish themselves, and they were assessing to where the young designers kept saying, my God, why would we, this is going to be great. They'll see the value of Walt Disney World. They'll see the value of the library, the film library, and they'll grow the business. And they did. And the company took off. It was like a rocket ship. It just took off. Because when you dealt with these guys, and I know Ron Miller was the CEO of the company, and Ron was a really nice guy, really a great guy. But when you saw these guys like Michael Eisner and Frank Wells and Jeffrey Katzenberg and these guys come in, these guys were world-class entertainment executives, and they knew what the hell they were doing. Yeah. So So I mean, I did everything. I did interviews. I mean, Michael would call, and I'd have to go in meetings with these guys and tell them what we were working on, and then they'd also call and say, look, I remember Michael Eisner's son was doing a report on the ocean, so I had to give him a presentation, and then Michael would bring in. Michael was trying to inject another level of interest into the Walt Disney Company, because you have to remember the Walt Disney Company. I would tell people I worked at WED Enterprises, and they go, "What is that?" And they go, "Well, it's Walt Disney's, design company for the theme parks." And they go, "Disney? Disney's that little cartoon company in the valley." If you looked at all the major powerhouses, Paramount, MGM, Warner Brothers, Universal, Columbia, everybody, Disney was like not even in the top, the top 6, right? They were just the bottom, at the bottom. Well, those guys turned the company around, and we all know what the Walt Disney Company is today. It's a monster, right? It's a monster. And it really started with Walt and continued with those guys. So what happened is, when we opened the Living Seas Pavilion in January of 85, just 6 months after these guys came, this was ended up being the big rollout for I would do all of the morning shows, the TV shows, and we did TV specials, and it was so exciting. I can't even tell you how to watch what these guys could do to rejuvenate the Walt Disney Company, because the assets were there. The film library, unbelievable. I mean, they also lucked out in terms of technology, because that was the time when video cassettes were coming out, and they started like, hey, let's put the library on video cassettes. They made billions of dollars. Okay. So he was like, there were no hotels down there. When I was working on the Living Seas Pavilion, there was, we'd be out of work at, we'd start at 7 a.m, we'd finish at, 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And, there's no places to eat, So they came in and they put in 30,000 hotel rooms. Walt Disney World is like a phenomenon that can't even be believed. And they grew that. And it was just like the company grew the way it should grow. And I will tell you, the most extraordinary thing that and I'm being honest as possible, one of the many reasons that I am very pro Disney is because the company, since its very beginning, has grown through creativity and doing things the right way. They don't grow by, we'll sell off, half of Walt Disney World, make money on real estate. No, they don't do that. They do it, and they've been lucky. They were lucky with Michael Eisner and Frank Wells. They were lucky with Bob Iger. And so, that's one thing that I think the reason the popularity of the company is so strong is because they do the things correctly. They do it right. And they're not, and it's expensive to do work, but it pays off. And that's why people believe in it so much.
All right, my friend, I think this is a good place to wrap up the first part of our episode with Tim. Next time, we will dive deeper into Discoveryland, talking about the Timekeeper, Star Tours, and other attractions, and even a project that was originally planned for Paris but never actually happened. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, you can find many more of our French language episodes on all major streaming platforms. Feel free to check out our Redbubble store for exclusive podcast merch and design. Or if you'd like to support us, you can send a small tip via our PayPal page. You will find all the links on our website .puissancepark.fr. See you in 2 weeks for the next part of our interview with Tim Delaney. See you, bye bye!